The king's decision, the throne room of the alien king, was quiet, but not with peace. It was the heavy quiet of fear, the kind that made even the strongest soldier stand stiff. Outside the palace walls, the galaxy burned. Fleets clashed in distant space, and rumors spread through every star system that the king's enemies were preparing for one final strike. The king sat high on his throne of black stone, his face hard as metal, yet his eyes betrayed something he never allowed his people to see: doubt. His empire had survived many wars, but this war was different. His soldiers fought with courage, but courage was not enough when the enemies grew stronger with every passing season. The king knew the truth. His rule was fragile, and his enemies were watching for a single weakness. That weakness was his daughter. She stood at the far side of the throne room, her head lowered, her arms thin, her skin pale compared to the warriors around her. She was not built like them. She was not fierce, not hardened, not sharp. She was frail, and her presence was a quiet shame in a court filled with fire and strength. The king's council had whispered it for years. She is not ready. She cannot lead. She will be the ruin of us all. The words ate at him like poison. In private, he cursed the day she was born so fragile. Yet when he looked at her, he felt the pull of blood, the bond of a father. But a king was not only a father. A king was duty, and duty demanded sacrifice. That day, when the palace doors opened and the human entered, the king knew the sacrifice had arrived. The human did not wear the robes of nobility. He did not bow with grace. His steps were strong, heavy, and without fear. He was a warrior, a survivor of battles that most men would not live to tell. His eyes carried something the aliens had never understood: unyielding fire, a kind of will that bent the universe around it. The king's voice broke the silence. "You know why you are here." The human nodded once. He was not a man of wasted words. The king turned his gaze toward his daughter. Her face was pale, her lips trembling, but she did not cry. She had learned long ago that tears only brought more shame. "You are weak," the king said to her, his voice heavy with judgment. "And weakness has no place in this empire. But weakness can be given away. Weakness can be shaped, or it can be destroyed." Gasps echoed through the court, but no one dared to interrupt. The king's hand stretched toward the human. "I give her to you. She is no longer mine. Teach her, break her, or cast her into the dark, it matters not. She is yours. If she dies, it will not be my loss. If she lives, then prove to me she can be more than this shame." The daughter raised her eyes at last, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. She looked not at her father, but at the human who now owned her fate. His face was unreadable, but his eyes studied her with the weight of a blade held at her throat. Fear clawed inside her chest. She wanted to run, but there was no place to go. She wanted to scream, but her voice was lost. All she could do was step forward when the human extended his hand. His grip was strong, and for the first time she felt something unexpected. She felt that he was not looking at her as weakness. He was looking at her as if she was clay, raw and unshaped, waiting for the fire that could harden her into stone. The court whispered again, their voices sharp like knives. Some laughed under their breath, already counting her death as certain. Others shook their heads, pitying the human for being given such a burden. But no one believed she would return. The king turned away, his judgment final. "Take her." The human did not bow, nor did he thank the king. He simply pulled the girl to his side and led her out of the throne room. The great doors closed behind them with a heavy crash that echoed like a tomb sealing shut. In the shadows of the hallway, the girl finally whispered, her voice shaking. Why did you take me?" The human glanced at her, and his answer was simple yet sharp as a blade. "Because I see what your father does not." Her heart raced, not from hope but from confusion. She did not know if his words were a promise or a curse. All she knew was that her life as a fragile daughter of a king had ended. What lay ahead was unknown, and the unknown was far more terrifying than her father's throne. That night, as the human's ship left the alien world behind, she looked through the cold glass of the viewport. The palace lights grew smaller, swallowed by the darkness of space. She thought of the king who had given her away, and she thought of the human whose fire seemed to burn without end. Somewhere deep inside her, buried under years of weakness and shame, a spark flickered. It was small, but it was alive. The king believed he had given his weakness away. He did not know that weakness, when pushed into fire, could become something far more dangerous, and the galaxy would soon learn it. The humans' harsh lessons. The human's ship traveled through dark space, far from the golden palace where the girl had spent her quiet life. Inside the ship, everything felt cold and sharp. Metal walls hummed with the sound of engines, and the air smelled of iron and oil. The princess sat on a narrow bench, her eyes wide, her hands gripping the edge as if she might fall even though the ship did not shake. The human stood across from her, silent, arms crossed over his chest. He did not speak for hours, and the silence pressed on her like weight. She wanted to ask where he was taking her, but her voice would not rise. She felt like a child again, small and unworthy. At last, the human spoke. His voice was deep, calm, but carried the edge of command. You will forget you are a princess. Out there, it means nothing. Out there, only strength matters. Do you understand? She nodded weakly, but he shook his head. Say it. Her throat felt tight, but she forced the words out. I understand. The human turned and walked away, leaving her with her thoughts. That night, she lay in the narrow bunk he had given her. Sleep did not come. Images of her father's face, cold and final, burned in her mind. His words, weakness has no place, echoed again and again. The next day, training began. The human woke her before the first light of the twin suns. He threw a wooden staff at her feet. Defend yourself. She stared at the staff, confused. I do not know how. Then learn. He struck without warning. The staff in his hand whipped through the air, and she barely raised hers in time. The blow knocked her down, the wood biting into her arms. Pain burned through her, and she gasped, but he did not stop. Strike after strike came, fast and merciless. She stumbled, fell, cried out, but he gave her no mercy. When at last she lay in the dust outside the ship, bruised and shaking, he stood over her. Do you think your enemies will wait until you are ready? Do you think they will show you kindness? Out there, kindness will kill you. Get up. Her body screamed, but something inside her refused to stay down. Slowly, with trembling arms, she rose. The human nodded once. Day after day, the lessons continued. She ran until her legs gave out. She fought until her hands bled. She carried stones on her back, climbed cliffs with raw fingers, and stood in storms of wind until she could barely breathe. Each time she thought she would break, the human was there, his voice cold, demanding, never soft. You are not weak because your body is small. You are weak because you believe it. Stop believing it. The words struck deeper than the blows. She began to hate him, his endless commands, his pitiless eyes. But in that hate something stirred. When he knocked her down, she forced herself up faster. When he ordered her to run farther, she clenched her teeth and pushed her body until fire burned in her lungs. One night, as she sat by the small fire outside the ship, she touched her hands and saw the skin had hardened. The bruises on her body no longer frightened her. They had become marks of survival, proof that she had not broken. The human sat across the fire, sharpening a blade. His eyes lifted to her for a moment. You are learning, she blinked, startled by the rare words. Learning what? To stop being a shadow. Her chest tightened. She remembered her father's throne room, the sneers, the whispers of the court. A shadow, that was all she had been. But here, under the weight of pain, she felt something shift. The next day, the human threw her into the river. She hit the water, cold and wild, and panic clawed at her chest. She thrashed, choking until she thought she would sink. But his voice roared across the water. Fight or drown, choose. Her arms struck the water, her legs kicked, and slowly, breath by breath, she rose above the waves. When she reached the shore, gasping and soaked, she looked up to find the human watching. For the first time, there was no cold judgment in his eyes. There was something sharper, something alive. Good, he said. That night she lay awake, not from pain but from thought. For the first time in her life, she did not feel like the king's shame. She felt something else, something dangerous. A small seed of strength had been planted. Her father had given her away, certain she would break. But under the human's cruel lessons, she was beginning to see that maybe, just maybe, she would. The warrior. Awaken's weeks turned into months, and the fragile girl who had once walked in fear through her father's throne room was slowly disappearing. In her place, something new was rising, though she did not yet understand what it truly was. The human's training never softened. If anything, it grew harder. The bruises healed only to be replaced by new ones. Her hands, once smooth, now carried scars and hardened skin. Her back, once bent with exhaustion, now straightened with growing strength. Every day she pushed herself further, not because she wanted to please the human, but because she wanted to silence the voice of her father that echoed in her memory. Weakness has no place. One morning, when the suns rose red over the cliffs near their camp, the human tossed her a real blade instead of the wooden staff she had carried before. It was heavy in her hand, its edge gleaming like fire. "Today you stop pretending," he said. Her heart pounded. For weeks she had fought only with wood and stone. To hold a real weapon felt like stepping into a new world, one where mistakes were not forgiven. He attacked without warning, as always. The sound of steel striking steel cracked through the air. Her arms shook under the weight, but she did not fall. Step by step she met his blows, clumsy at first, but steadier with each strike. The human's eyes studied her closely. For the first time he pushed harder, testing her limits not to break her but to see how far she could go. When she stumbled, she did not collapse. When she fell, she rolled to her feet. When her blade slipped, she caught it again before it struck the ground. By the end of the day, her body ached as if set on fire, but when she looked at her reflection in the river, she hardly recognized herself. The weak girl with trembling hands was gone. The face that looked back at her had sharper eyes, a firmer jaw, and something else, a hunger, a fire that had never existed before. That night, as the fire burned low, she asked the human a question she had carried for weeks. "Why do you push me so hard? You could have let me fail. You could have cast me aside like my father." The human looked at her, his face hard in the glow of the flames. "Because you are not weak. You only believed it, and belief is more dangerous than any wound." His words sank into her like iron. She lay awake, turning them over in her mind. She was not weak. She had been told she was. She had lived as if she was. But here, with blood on her hands and fire in her chest, she felt the lie unravel. The next weeks proved it. Her strikes grew faster, her steps sharper. She learned to move silently across the rocks, to track sounds in the dark, to fight until her breath tore from her lungs. She no longer waited for mercy. She no longer begged for rest. She met each command with silent defiance, forcing her body to obey. And soon even the human could not hide his surprise. One morning, during sparring, she knocked his blade from his hand. It clattered against the stone, and for the first time she stood over him, her own blade raised. Her chest heaved, her arms shook, but she did not drop it. The human did not move. Instead, he smiled, a rare, fierce smile. "Now you begin to understand." She lowered the blade slowly, her hands trembling not from fear but from the weight of what she had just done. She had struck the man who had seemed unbreakable, the warrior her father had trusted more than armies, and she had stood. From that day, everything changed. She was no longer just a student. She became a fighter, a shadow that moved with deadly grace. Her voice grew stronger, her steps carried purpose, and even the stars above seemed different when she looked at them. But with strength came whispers. In nearby villages, word spread of the alien king's daughter. Some said she was dead. Others said she had run away in shame. But a few told darker stories, that she trained with a human, that she was becoming something dangerous. The whispers reached the ears of the king's enemies. They laughed when they heard. The weak daughter of a king turned warrior? Impossible. Yet even as they laughed, unease crept into their voices. What if the stories were true? The girl, now no longer fragile, felt the weight of those whispers as she trained. Every strike she made against the human, every wound she endured, every scar on her hands became a piece of her answer to the galaxy. She was not her father's shame anymore. She was becoming something the galaxy had never expected, and though she did not yet know it, the day was coming when she would have to prove it, not with training but with blood. The human saw it too. One evening, as they stood on the cliffs, he said quietly, "You are no longer a shadow, but soon the galaxy will test if you are truly a flame." She did not flinch. Her eyes, once full of fear, now burned with calm fire. "Let them test me." And in that moment, she was no longer the daughter her father had given away. She was something else entirely. She was the beginning of a warrior. The trial of blood. The whispers grew louder with each passing week. Across the galaxy, nobles mocked the alien king, saying he had thrown away his weak daughter to a human. Some laughed, calling it an act of desperation. Others claimed it was a hidden insult to humans, a way of saying that weakness belonged only in their hands. But then came the rumors of her training, the stories of her scars, her battles, her survival. and laughter turned into uneasy silence. The enemies of the king, eager to break his pride, sent a challenge. They demanded that the girl step into the sacred arena, the circle where warriors proved themselves through blood. If she was truly changing, they said, let her show it. If not, let her die where all could see. The king, still certain she would fail, accepted the challenge. For him, it was a way to prove that his enemies were fools for believing in her. But in the human's eyes, it was different. It was the test he had been waiting for. When the girl heard of the trial, fear rose inside her like a storm. She remembered the throne room, the laughter, the shame. Now she would face not just whispers, but steel aimed at her heart. She wanted to refuse, to run, but the human's words cut through her fear. You asked for strength. Now you must show it. The arena will not care about your past. Neither should you. The day of the trial came. The arena was carved deep into stone, its walls rising high, filled with thousands of voices. Nobles, soldiers, and enemies gathered to see the king's daughter fall. Dust swirled in the heat of the suns, and the air smelled of blood from battles long past. The girl walked into the center, her blade in hand. Her body shook, but her eyes burned with the fire the human had lit inside her. Across from her stood a warrior twice her size, his armor black, his face scarred, his weapon heavy with years of killing. He smiled at her, cruel and certain. You will not last a breath, he growled. The horn sounded and the trial began. The warrior charged like a beast, his blade crashing down with the weight of thunder. The girl stumbled, the ground shaking beneath her, but she remembered the human's lessons. Do not meet strength with fear. Meet it with speed. She rolled aside, dust rising as his blade struck the earth. Her heart raced, her body screaming. But she forced her legs to move. She struck, quick as a spark, her blade cutting across his side. It was shallow, but it was blood. The crowd roared. Anger flashed in the warrior's eyes. He struck again and again, heavy blows that would have shattered her months ago. But now she ducked, spun, and twisted, each movement sharp with training. His size slowed him, but her fire drove her. Every scar on her hands, every bruise on her body, every night she had cried in silence, they all rose inside her now. Not as pain, but as power. The warrior's blade clipped her shoulder, drawing blood, but she did not fall. She pressed forward, her own blade cutting deeper. He staggered, surprised, his confidence cracking. The crowd gasped. The human, watching from the shadows, did not move, but his eyes burned with pride. At last, the warrior roared and swung with all his might. A blow meant to end her, but she did not flinch. She stepped into the strike, turning her blade with a cry that echoed across the arena. Steel clashed, sparks flew, and his weapon slipped from his hands. Silence fell for a heartbeat. Then her blade was at his throat. The warrior froze, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with disbelief. The crowd erupted into chaos, shouts, cries, gasps of shock. The king's enemies stared in silence, their mocking smiles gone. The girl stood over her fallen foe, her blade steady, her eyes hard. She did not tremble. She did not look away. She had faced blood and she had not broken. The horn sounded again, declaring her the victor. The king, watching from his throne above, felt something he had never expected. Fear. His daughter, the frail shadow he had cast aside. Rise of the Relentless warrior. The arena was silent long after the battle ended. The girl's victory was not supposed to be possible. The king's daughter, once whispered about as frail and hopeless, had stood against a seasoned warrior and left him broken on the dust. Her name, once spoken in shame, now echoed in the voices of thousands who had seen her rise with their own eyes. But her father, the alien king, did not cheer. He sat high on his throne, his face carved in stone, but deep inside he felt the weight of something new, unease. For years he had believed his daughter was weakness. He had cast her away, certain she would either break or disappear. Now she had returned stronger than his fiercest soldiers, sharper than the advisors who had mocked her, and fiercer than even he could have imagined. When she left the arena that day, the human walked at her side. He said nothing at first. His eyes told the truth. He was no longer looking at a child in need of saving. He was looking at a warrior who had forged herself in fire. At the gates of the palace, soldiers stepped back as she passed. No one laughed anymore. No one whispered. They stared, their faces pale because they had seen the fragile girl with their own eyes and now saw someone else entirely. That night, the king summoned her. She stood before his throne, no longer trembling. Her armor was dented. Her blade carried dried blood, and her eyes no longer looked at the floor. They looked straight at him. "You shamed me," the king said coldly, his voice heavy with years of pride. "You were weakness." "I was what you believed me to be," she answered, her voice firm. "But I am not that anymore." The words struck him harder than any blade. Around them, the court stood in silence, too afraid to breathe. The human's presence in the shadows made the silence heavier. The king's lips tightened, his pride fighting against the truth in front of him. Finally, his voice lowered. "Perhaps you are no longer weakness. But strength is not proven by one victory. The galaxy watches, and it will test you again and again." Her answer came sharp, without hesitation. "Let it test me." And with those words, she walked out of the throne room, leaving her father frozen on his throne. From that day, the galaxy began to change. Stories of the king's daughter spread like fire through the stars. She was no longer the fragile shadow of her family, but a warrior who stood unbroken in the trial of blood. Enemies who had mocked the king now looked at her with wary eyes. Allies who had doubted now whispered of her as a force that might one day reshape the throne itself. The human remained at her side, but his role shifted. He was no longer only her teacher. He became her ally, her shadow, her witness as she built her strength beyond even his expectations. Sometimes he smiled quietly, watching her strike with precision, and thought of the trembling girl he had first taken from the palace. She was gone forever. Months later, the enemies of the king launched another challenge. This time they did not laugh. They feared. The girl, no longer a girl but a warrior, stepped onto battlefields leading soldiers who once refused to follow her. She fought with fire in her veins, her scars shining like armor, her voice commanding not with titles but with earned respect. In the eyes of her people, she became more than a princess. She became a symbol, proof that weakness was not a curse but a lie, proof that strength could be forged in places no one expected. Her father watched all of it unfold, his pride swallowed by something deeper, regret. He had thrown her away thinking she was nothing. Now she was more than he had ever been. The galaxy whispered about his throne, and some even wondered if the true strength of the empire no longer sat with the king, but walked in the fire of his daughter. One night, as she stood on the cliffs outside the palace, the human came to her side. The stars burned bright, and the sound of distant drums echoed from the training grounds where soldiers now followed her. "You have become what you were meant to be," he said. She shook her head. "No, I have only begun." The human studied her face, the calm fire in her eyes, and for the first time he believed her words completely. She was no longer the fragile daughter of a king. She was no longer a shadow, no longer a burden. She was a relentless warrior, born from pain, shaped by fire, and driven by a will the galaxy could not bend. And as the stars stretched endless above her, she whispered not to her father, not to the human, but to the universe itself, "I will never be weakness again." Her story was only beginning, but the galaxy already trembled at the thought of where it might end.